In order to explain consciousness physically, we first have to turn to philosophy to determine or find the very foundation of consciousness, or the base from which all other subjective events in our minds actually arise. We need to find out what that principle is that comes first. In philosophy, this is even called the being or the primordial origin, and then from there, we will then try to explain it using the language of physics. So for that, we will go to the 1st century AD, where the Greek king Menander, a Seleucid king who remained in Kashmir after the conquest of Alexander the Great, meets the sage Nagasena in the Himalayas at the source of the Ganges River, and they discuss the fundamental principles or the fundamental philosophy that concerns the old king. The king says, "Now I am an old man, and I have been coming to the source of this river since I was a young boy. A little boy throwing pebbles into it. Later I came as a mature warrior, then as a husband, a father of a family, then as a king who rules the state, and now I am an almost powerless old man looking at this river. The course of this river is constantly changing waters, its plants, its banks, the stones roll, the fish swim and change as well. Nothing at all is permanent here, and only the name of this river Ganges persists, if at all. In the same way, when I look at what has happened with my body and with my thoughts, feelings, aspirations when I was a little boy, when I was a warrior, when I was a young man, a statesman, and now when I am an old man, none of that is constant at all. So tell me, wise Nagasena, what then is truly permanent and constant in this universe?" Nagasena looked at him and said, "Oh, wise king, think again. It is precisely this awareness with which you have observed that river from your early youth through all these years that has not moved from a single point at all. It is always present in the same way. It is not conditioned by anything, and you observe this river always in exactly the same way." What is interesting here is that this point of observation with which we look at reality, which is located between our ears and somewhere behind our eyes, is a point of singularity in time that exists in the perpetual moment of the present. This means that everything changes around the point of observation. So the external world changes, people change, events change, but our body also changes. Our thoughts, our emotions change non-stop, and nothing is constant except for the act of aware observation itself that perceives, and which we can rightfully call a singularity because it is a point in space and in time. We reside with our consciousness at an ever-present here and now. Since this eternal moment of now on the timeline has no dimension, no measurable duration, we are always in the present moment, and we are never in the past, except when we think about memories, nor are we ever in the future, except when we plan or think about what could be. Physically, our consciousness and its ability for observation, we are always in the present. That is why David Bohm also says something phenomenal. All moments are actually just one. Therefore, this present moment is everlasting, which means eternal. It cannot pass because there is no time dimension. What physics also tells us is that if time does not flow for a certain phenomenon, then it means that this phenomenon moves at the speed of light, or based on what we know today, it is based on photons. And photons are nothing more than quantum measurements or packets of the electromagnetic field which come at defined energy, that is, frequencies. Already from this phenomenon of attention which exists in a permanent present, we can conclude that consciousness is actually a quantum phenomenon of the electromagnetic field. And it has long been known that the brain produces an electromagnetic field at several base frequencies, which we measure from delta and theta to alpha and beta, which are already conscious frequencies, and gamma, which at 40 Hz in fact represents the activity of the cortex in the visual part of the brain, covering 70% of its surface. We have two types of aware attention. One is diffuse, the other focally pinpointed. Most likely, the alpha rhythm at around 10 Hz and the gamma rhythm at around 25 Hz represent these two types of attention with which we can observe various phenomena that are within our conscious awareness. Interestingly, 10 Hz and 20 to 25 Hz actually represent the resonant frequencies of the skull and the brain respectively, and they overlap or double up on each other. Another confirmation that consciousness is a phenomenon of oscillation, or rather field resonance, is the fact that anesthesiologists discovered long ago that when certain chemicals bind to microtubules in neurons and thereby literally make them heavier by lengthening them, they cannot oscillate above 7 Hz. The EM field then shuts down, meaning the frequencies in higher range are absent, and only the subconscious processes in the body remain active, those based on theta. So with anesthetics, we bind the microtubules in neurons, which are actually elements that give structural form to the cells, i.e. skeletons. And in doing so, we stop their vibrations. The vibration and oscillation of the electrochemical system in the brain is not only the flow of electricity and the intense shaking of those ions at the synapses where the energy throws them, but the neurons themselves also vibrate. That is the gray matter in the brain. The energy push of the photons directly works on the matter. It has been known for quite a long time, I believe at least 20 to 25 years, that through the resonance, that is, by bringing various neural areas in the brain into synchrony, recognition or identification of an image or of a concept, an understanding occurs. Bringing diverse concepts into the same field by phase, shift, aka resonance, includes them into the concept that consciousness perceives. This is a proof more that synchronous field oscillation gives rise to awareness. The neural synapses open or close, shunting tissue into or out of sync, but the integration of information happens by the only means possible, the encompassing field. As Professor McFadden shows, there is no other mechanism that could integrate all this information otherwise. So, on this slide, we can see that when disparate neurological centers enter the gamma range of 25 Hz here, for round, sweet, crunchy, and green, which are connected by axonal white matter, and they start to resonate in the same core resonance. We simply perceive a green apple that we would gladly bite into because it is crunchy and sweet. So by bringing certain neural centers into resonance with others, we obtain a new concept within our attention, and by taking them out of resonance, we lose it. In the same way, we can wish to raise our hand, which is the result of certain neural centers activating the motoric nerves in our body. In this way, we are also able to visualize, conceptualize, or recall a memory within one of these neural centers, which will begin to oscillate within the brain's electromagnetic field, and we can evoke both the image and the memory of practically anything we can conceive of by our own will. This means that our will directly influences the electromagnetic state, oscillation, and resonance of various centers in the brain. Now, although there have been many theories about the electromagnetic basis of consciousness, the people who dealt with this, whether logicians, philosophers, neurologists, doctors, or biologists, somehow did not understand electromagnetics the way we electrical engineers do. For us, the brain is, in our understanding, an antenna that both sends and receives electromagnetic field stimuli. This is quite clearly evident from the way dendrites function on a nerve cell, as we can observe a single synapse located at the end of an axon coming out of a neuron, where the dendrites themselves look like small antennas that listen for disturbances in the electromagnetic resonant field. Synchronous action potential ionic firing of the many neurons has the intensity whose amplitude can be incredibly high. This is because it involves synchronous resonant action, meaning all these pulse signals are superimposed, and just 3 to 4 quanta of energy are already enough to release neurotransmitters in the synapse and for the next neuron down the chain to join the dance. This means that neurons simultaneously generate energy through their axons, which with large bursts of ions in this synaptic area creates an electromagnetic field. In return, the electromagnetic field, since it is not a different phenomenon from the electricity passing through the myelin shift, insulated axon affects the entire brain tissue and beyond. and all the more so because disparate centers up to 20 centimeters apart on the head can oscillate together, while the axonal white matter is fixed. An electrical engineer, according to the theory of four-pole networks, sees that you cannot make objects with different impedance weights oscillate together unless you balance them so that they have identical RLC components and can actually come into resonance with each other at all. The only way those fixed axon cables can make an oscillation on the other side oscillate in the same phase and frequency is through a wireless connection. The only wireless media that connects all is again the EM field of the brain. Now, all theories of electromagnetic consciousness, of which I would say the most advanced, is that of Professor John Joe McFadden from the University of Surrey. He is a dear professor and a fellow from the beautiful County Donegal. As a biologist, he arrived at the idea through quantum mechanics that nothing else can be the integral conscious factor of consciousness except the electromagnetic field, but he lacks physical explanation for why this is so. That is how subjective experience arises from neural activity. There are a few possible explanations here. What exactly is the collapse of the quantum wave and why it leads to consciousness? One of the best explanations is through Professor Kramer's transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics, but it is quite difficult for people who do not understand physics, wave mechanics, and Dirac's function, while the next most complex explanation is through electrodynamics. Namely, when according to the diagram we looked at earlier in this presentation, four disparate regions, each located in different parts of the system, resonate together at exactly the same frequency. The resulting electromagnetic fields begin to overlap with one another, creating a combined one. Specifically, the bursts of photons that make up the field, since the field propagates through quanta of energy that we call photons as established by Einstein, for which he received the Nobel Prize. Photons are a wave, or rather a part of the field, which remains a wave until the moment it discharges, i.e., is converted into a definite particle. To discharge and collapse its wave, a photon finds an exact opposite vector to its own somewhere within the area where the four-dimensional wave field from the emitter has spread. This is according to the electrodynamics, and we call this the collapse of the photonic or quantum wave. The place where it has collapsed, that is where it turns into a particle, is the point it has touched with own momentum. And the entire boundary of the field knows that the wave no longer exists elsewhere. So if we take the integral of all the photons that are being discharged and emptied at the same time through resonance, then the result of that integral is that in fact this light or electromagnetic field is probing the electromagnetic state boundaries within the electromagnetic environment of the brain and reporting that state to the virtual center of emitting from which the field originated. In the resonant field, all the photons that are emitted are bosons, which means that because of their spin, they overlap and their center of emission falls into a single point in the middle of the head, specifically around the thalamus itself. The thalamus is a conglomerate of gray matter that has the shape of a miniature brain located at the very center of the skull and brain. Since it is the gray matter, it means that it produces an electromagnetic field, but it appears to function as an active antenna, which means it can add to or subtract from the signal's wavelength and change the frequencies of entrainment. And its function, which has been medically and neurologically proven, is not only to regulate when we sleep and when we are conscious, that is, when we move from theta to alpha or gamma, but also to be able to select and resist the influx of signals that are not in sync or important from other centers. This means it can, like a directed active antenna, amplify and retain signals from those centers in the brain that we want to be part of our consciousness. Since we've concluded that we can voluntarily activate individual neural centers of the cortex, in telephone networks, active antennas do exactly the same thing. They choose the path they want to illuminate or connect to field so they can listen to signals coming specifically from there. The thalamus simultaneously brings sensory and motor signals from the body, and beneath it is the hypothalamus, which secretes all those most important chemicals of happiness, dopamine, oxytocin, and so on, based on what in Russian is called chuvstva, which is an old Slavic word for sensations and feelings. The way the thalamus feels, that's how it will secrete chemicals of happiness, unhappiness, and so on into the body. If the thalamus is disturbed or partially damaged, or if the focal point is shifted so that it doesn't properly target the thalamus, we will have disorders like depression, inability to focus, consciousness, and so on. So this double antenna, made up of the great matter of the thalamus that actively selects content and the outer cortex that offers the complexity of content, together with the stem or base of nerves that brings in motor and sensory signals, represents precisely that Cartesian theater which unifies all the contents of consciousness, all qualia at once, through our two types of attention and through countless feelings of qualia, which are essentially the integrals of what we experience. We can feel the greenness of nature along with the well-being of the body, the fullness of a satisfied stomach, the happiness in life, the movement of muscles and thoughts about what that rabbit is doing over there in the bush, all at the same time, all within the same field, because this field, just like neurons, the electromagnetic field completely reflects all of its contents. So if we have even a single neuron for Bill Clinton, and maybe even for Monica Lewinsky, when those neurons oscillate, the field on that spot also oscillates, and we become aware of the content that that neuron contributes, and its sensation enters into the picture of our overall consciousness.